Hi, welcome to my video on solving a quadratic by completing the square. This is the third method that we've done. The first method was solved by factoring. The second one was the square root property. And now we're going to learn how to solve by completing the square. Solve ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where a is not 0, by completing the square. We're going to follow these steps that I will do in all my examples. Move c, which is this number, will be a number, to the right and change signs. Divide all terms by the a value so that the numerical coefficient of x squared is 1. Complete the square on the left side and add the same number to the right side to balance the equation. Number 4, factor the left side as bracket x plus or minus h squared. Simplify the right side. Do the square root of both sides, which is the square root property. Note the right side is plus minus. Simplify the roots if possible. Do both sides. And move the h to the right side and simplify. That's the rules that I'm going to follow, but let's do some examples to explain what I mean. Example, solve each for x, and again we're solving it by completing the square. We could factor, we could do the square root property, etc. But the square root property is when b is 0. b is not 0. So I will do it by completing the square. So we will move the constant to the right side, 16, and make it positive. Now we have to complete the square. Notice that a is 1. What we want is the coefficient of x squared to be a 1, so we can complete the square. So to complete the square, 6, which is your b, divided by 2 squared. And that's 3 squared, which is 9. So we'll add 9 to the right side, and to balance it, we'll also add 9 to the left side. Now we'll factor this. This is a perfect square trinomial. So this isn't going to be x squared is an x, and a half of 6 is 3. So this is a plus 3, because this number here is a half of whatever this is right here, because that's b divided by 2. And that gives me a 25. So x plus 3 all squared is the factorization of x squared plus 6x plus 9. And now we'll do the square root of both sides, x plus 3 all squared, plus or minus the square root of 25. This is the square root property, and the square root of x plus 3 all squared is x plus 3. And this is square root plus or minus the square root of 25 is plus or minus 5. X equals negative 3 plus or minus 5. So x equals negative 3 plus 5, or negative 3 minus 5. So x is equal to 2, or negative 8. Completing the square. And let's do b. 2x squared plus 8x plus 6 equals 0. We're solving it by completing the square. So 2x squared plus 8x equals negative 6. This is the c moving over. Now we'll divide, because I want x squared to have a 1 coefficient, I will divide all terms by 2. So we get x squared plus 4x equals negative 3. And now we complete the square on this binomial here. So this is x squared plus 4x. So we have 4 divided by 2 squared. That's 2 squared, which is 4. So to complete the square, I take half of 4 and square it. That gives me a 4, and I will add that 4 onto each. I add the 4 here to complete the square, so I add the 4 to the right side to balance it. And that gives me perfect square trinomial, which is a binomial here squared. So x squared becomes x, and a half of plus 4 is a plus 2. And that gives me a 1. Now I do the square root of both sides, and the plus minus goes on the right side. And the square root of x plus 2 all squared is x plus 2. Plus minus the square root of 1 is 1. So x equals negative 2 plus or minus 1. The plus 2 moves over to become a minus. So x equals negative 2 plus 1, or negative 2 minus 1. So x is equal to negative 1 or negative 3. Again, we have a quadratic. We have two answers. X squared is quadratic, two answers. So let's continue to do some more examples. Again, the more I show you, the more you see what's the pattern. And let's do C, solve. Solve by completing the square. X squared minus 10x minus 22. So x squared minus 10x equals positive 22 when you move it over. The a is already a 1, so I don't have to divide. Now I'm going to complete the square. So complete the square, negative 10 divided by 2 squared. And that gives me negative 5 squared, which is 25. So this is a plus 25. And so I add 25 onto each side to balance it. Again, this is a negative 10. Half of that is negative 5 squared is 25. That makes this a perfect square trinomial. The factor, that's an x squared, so that's an x. And a half of negative 10, so that's a negative 5. So x minus 5 all squared is the factorization of this trinomial. And that equals 47 when you add it up. So the square root of x minus 5 squared, all squared, equals plus or minus the square root of 47. So x minus 5 equals plus or minus the root of 47. 47 is a prime, so we can't simplify it. So x is equal to 5. Negative 5 moves over to become plus or minus the square root of 47. So we could leave it like that, or we could say x is equal to 5 plus the square root of 47, or 5 minus the square root of 47. And when we say solve for x, we mean to find the exact values. It leaves the radical as it is. And so D, well, I have a fraction here, and I'm a believer that when I deal with equations and I'm solving and I have fractions, I eliminate the fraction. So the LCD is a 2. So I'm going to multiply all parts of my equation by 2. That will eliminate the fraction. 2 times a half is 1, so that's an x squared. 2 times 8x is 16x. 2 times 30 is 60. And 2 times 0 is 0. So now I have no fraction to deal with, because when I'm solving equations with fractions, I multiply every term by the LCD to eliminate the fraction. Now I have x squared plus 16x equals negative 60. X squared plus 16x, and I have 16, so a half of 16 squared. And that's 8 being squared, so that's a 64. So I put 64 there, and I put 64 here. So 64, half of 16 is 8, 64. I balance both sides with a 64. The factorization of x squared plus 16x plus 64, x, half of positive 16 is a positive 8, so x plus 8 all squared gives me this trinomial. And negative 60 plus 64 is 4. And so now I will do the square root of both sides. And I'll also do plus minus on the right side. So that gives me x plus 8 equals plus minus 2. X equals negative 8 plus minus 2. X equals negative 8 plus 2, or negative 8 minus 2. X is negative 6 or negative 10. And that's the two values of x, again, is a quadratic, so you have two roots. You have a quadratic, so one root, there's the other. And practice. Now that I've shown you the pattern, you can now work on this and follow that pattern. So here we go. Again, pause the video, work out the solution, and when you get it done, press play to see if you're right, and do that for each one. That ensures you know what you're doing. First of all, I see a negative, and I don't like a negative, so I'm going to multiply each side, the whole equation, by a negative 1. So 7x squared minus 14x minus 21 equals, and I got 2 zeros there. I didn't mean to put 2 zeros in. So that 0 here equals 0 equals 0 is just a mistake. Again, sometimes when you proofread, you don't see what, as they say, you're looking, but you can't see it. Anyway, I multiplied by negative 1 to have a positive. Now, I will move 7x squared minus 14x equals positive 21. I'll divide all terms by 7. And the reason, because I want the coefficient of x squared to be a 1. So I divided 7 by 7, got 1. Negative 14 divided by 7 is 2. 2x, negative 2x. 21 divided by 7 is 3. And I'm going to complete the square. So x squared minus 2x equals, that's a 3. So to complete the square, we will do a negative 2 divided by 2 squared. And that's a negative 1 squared, which is 1. So plus 1 plus 1. And let's go up here. So that becomes factorization. The perfect square trinomial is an x. A half of negative 2 is a negative 1. So x minus 1 squared is the factorization of this. But this is a quick way to do it. You put an x, you take a half of that, which is negative 1. Put it in there and put the square outside. And that 3 plus 1 is 4. We do the square root of both sides. Plus minus on the right side. So x minus 1 equals plus minus square root of 4 is 2. So x is equal to 1 plus or minus 2. So x is 1 plus 2 or 1 minus 2. So x is equal to 3 or negative 1. And that's the solutions. Again, there's a quadratic, so we have two solutions. Number 2. And let's see, we have to move the constant term to the right side and make it negative. 16 becomes negative. Now we got 1x squared perfect, so we just continue to complete the square. So to complete the square, 8 divided by 2 squared. That's 4 squared is 16. So to complete the square, put a 16 there, and I'll also add 16 to the other side to balance it. And the factorization of that trinomial is an x. Half of plus 8 is a plus 4, so this is x plus 4 squared equals 0. So the square root of both sides, and we have plus minus the square root of 0. So x plus 4 equals 0, plus or minus 0. Now the reason I'm doing this plus or minus, you might say, well, that's just a 0. True, but I wanted to put that 0 there for a reason. So x equals negative 4 plus or minus 0. So x is equal to negative 4 plus a 0 or negative 4 minus a 0. So x is equal to negative 4 or negative 4. So notice you have a negative 4 twice. And you have to ask this, you have to ask your teacher about this, because there's only one root, but every quadratic has two roots. So there's a double root here of a negative 4. Yes, negative 4 is the root that makes this true, but there's two of them because every quadratic has two, and that's important for later on in your math. So check with your teacher. There's x is equal to negative 4. Yes, that's the answer, but there's two of them. And you'll see more explanation on that as we talk about it later. And next ones. Here we go. Solve for x by completing the square. Again, 3x squared plus 30x equals negative 39. We divide by 3 because we want the x squared to be a 1. Coefficient 10 and negative 13. And x squared plus 10x. And again, we take 10 divided by 2 and squared. That's 5 squared, so that's 25. So 25 completes the square. So we'll also add 25 to the right side. And the factorization is an x. Half of plus 10 is a plus 5. All squared is the factorization of this trinomial. And 13 and 25, negative 13, 25 is a 12. So square root of x plus 5 squared equals plus minus the square root of 12. So x plus 5, square root of x plus 5 all squared is x plus 5, and plus minus 12 is a 4 times 3. So that's a 2. Square root of 4 is 2, root 3. So x is equal to negative 5 plus or minus 2 root 3. So each answer, x is equal to negative 5 plus 2 root 3, or negative 5 minus 2 root 3. Two answers, quadratic. And number 4, we want to solve by completing the squares. So we'll, again, I like to remove the negative by multiplying all terms by negative 1. So it's a 2x squared minus 12x plus 14. Now, really, there's no need to do that, but I'm doing it because when I factor or when I solve, I like to have the leading coefficient positive, so I'm going to obey that. So I have 2x squared minus 12x equals negative 14. Then I divide by 2. X squared minus 6x equals negative 7. And the reason you divide by 2, because you want a 1 coefficient in order to complete the square. X squared minus 6x. And again, we have a negative 6 divided by 2, which gives me negative 3 squared. That gives me a 9. So plus 9 completes the square. So I got a negative 7 plus 9. And that gives me x, half of negative 6 is negative 3, so x minus 3 squared equals 2. And we do the square root of both sides. X minus 3 squared equals plus or minus the root of 2. X minus 3 equals plus or minus the root of 2. The root of 2 can't be simplified. So x equals 3 plus or minus the root of 2. And the two answers, 3 plus root 2 or 3 minus root 2. Check with your teacher if this answer is okay, knowing that they're both like this. But again, this is what I have when I move it over, but I like to write it out as these two answers. And number 5, we have to solve by completing the square. No fractions, no negatives, so 4x squared plus 20x equals a negative 11. We divide all terms by 4, so we're going to have an x squared. So x squared got a 1 coefficient as a 5x equals negative 11 over 4. Leave it as a fraction, don't change it to a decimal. So we have x squared plus 5x, negative 11 over 4. So 5 divided by 2 squared. So we can't simplify it, so that's 25 over 4. So 25 over 4 added on to both sides. And this perfect square trinomial, so this is an x. Half of plus 5 is 5 over 2. So factorization of this trinomial is x plus 5 over 2 all squared. And this adds up, the common denominator is 4. So negative 11 plus 25 is a 14. Now I could reduce this fraction here, but leave it, in this case, to leave it as a 4, because I'm going to do the square root of this, and the 4 is great. So Don't reduce this fraction. You can, but you'll only have to do more work on it. Leave it as a 4. So this becomes x plus 5 over 2 squared equals plus or minus the square root of 14 over 4. So x plus 5 over 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 14. You can't do it, but the square root of 4 on the bottom becomes a 2. So you do the square root of the top and the square root of the bottom, and the denominator of square root of 4 becomes a 2. So that's why you leave the 4 there without making it 7 over 2. So x is equal to negative 5 over 2 plus or minus the root of 14 over 2. So x is equal to negative 5 over 2 plus root 14 over 2, or negative 5 over 2 minus the root of 14 over 2. And you can leave them separate. You can have them as, if you wanted to, check again, you could have negative 5 plus root 14 like that. Negative 5 minus the root of 14 over 2. Because when you're adding, you can't add these together, but they're all over 2. So this answer here is great. You might check with your teacher. Leave it like this, I would. And that brings us to the end of completing the square. Another method for solving quadratics by completing the square. If you like my video, click the like button, the subscribe button, the notification bell, because there are more videos coming your way. Visit my math website, www.mathfullyexplained.com, to find more information about me, my videos, and the content. And that's the content that's on my YouTube channel called Math Fully Explained. Thank you for viewing my video. Bye-bye.